There is this woman who is standing chest deep in an icy cold lake. Her body is trembling uncontrollably as midnight stars flicker overhead. Nobody cares because this is a form of a punishment. On the shore, a small group of followers watch in tense silence. Overseeing it all is a man with an impassive stare, Andrew Cohen, the very guru she devoted her life to. He ordered her into the freezing water as penance for her spiritual failures. The woman's teeth chatter, her mind is frantic, yet she forces herself to endure, believing this ordeal will burn away her ego and please her teacher. This nightmare ritual isn't from a horror film. It actually happened within Cohen's spiritual community, and it was only one of many cruel lessons he demanded in the name of enlightenment. How did a group of sincere spiritual seekers end up here, half drowned, half frozen, and broken? All to satisfy the whim of one man, Andrew Cohen. Andrew Cohen's rise and fall is a cautionary tale, a story of idealism betrayed by authoritarian leadership and spiritual manipulation. It's a journey from the lofty promise of awakening to the dark heart of a cult-like community. In this story, we'll follow how Cohen's path from celebrated guru to disgraced teacher and explore how his followers slowly surrendered their autonomy, one promise and one punishment at a time. It's a story with serious emotional weight and serious warnings about the dangerous dynamics of cults. In stories like this, where trust is shattered by the very people claiming to lead us to the light, it really makes you think, who do we turn to when we're seeking clarity on our spiritual path? And how do we know who to trust? As someone who teaches spiritual topics and digs deep into these cautionary tales, I'm constantly reminded of how sacred your personal intuition is. But sometimes even the strongest intuition can feel clouded, especially when you're navigating something heavy like betrayal, grief, or your own spiritual uncertainty. That's actually why I reached out to today's sponsor, Psychic Source. Now listen, I'm not new to readings, okay? I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. But the one I had with my advisor through Psychic Source, it genuinely surprised me. I went in asking one thing: how do I know when I'm on the right path, especially when I've trusted the wrong people before? And they gave me insight that felt like a direct message from spirit. They told me, or you know what, I recorded it, matter of fact, but before I play it, just to put y'all a little bit in my business, after dealing with a lot of shady people in my life and even bullying back in the day, I'll be honest, there's always this little devil on my shoulder that has me second guessing myself, not wanting me to expose myself to the masses and put myself in a position to face that type of trauma again. So when I did my Psychic Source reading, I didn't tell them anything. No mention of BlaqueWitchYaya, no hint about what I do, no nothing. I didn't even use the advisors they recommended. I scrolled through and picked someone who stood out to me, went in completely incognito, and she still clouded me. I was just sitting there like, girl, how do you know this? But don't just take my word for it. I'll insert some clips from the reading that I feel comfortable with sharing.
That is distracting you or that are making you afraid to do something in particular, to like put your voice out there in a particular way, something like that. It feels like you've faced things that have caused some disappointment or just been like really taxing, that has to do with like maybe a little bit of shady behavior by people or something that is petty or something like that. And that you could be tired. That this is like a wounded warrior energy. So I really don't know if this is resonating for you or not, but I'm just reading the cards how they're coming through, that it's like it could create an insecurity of like, do I really have what it takes to really launch this out? Because it's going to take a lot of energy. The final card for what I've just pulled here is the Venus and Aries card. This is the Four of Wands. It's a completion card. And I think you really are on the right track. That's what I'm feeling. And you may have experienced some things that have just knocked you down and not allowed you to believe that this is going to be fruitful for you. And there'll just be work there. And if that's the case, I'm sorry about that, because of course, it's going to be, it's like bullies. There's like a bullying energy, or maybe something from the past that is now coming up that's kind of blocking you. Like, oh my God, I don't want to put my voice out there because I remember, being treated like this. It's kind of just like, I think your energy is waffling. Mm-hmm. And while that happens, it makes it really hard to fully manifest. That's okay, because we've been in, these are normal questions for, we're in a Mercury and Venus retrograde right now. So you're doing that work. What you're telling me is, this is the stuff you've been mulling over.
Now, what shocked me the most was the specific areas that she targeted. I didn't even say much. I'm actually a pretty private person, even when it comes to readings, but she still zeroed in on the exact things I had been silently stressing about. She was so detailed, I found myself with barely any questions, me not having questions, right? She touched on things that had been weighing on me heavily, and by the end of the session, a lot of the anxiety felt lifted. And let me just say, she didn't waste any time. She got straight to the point. There was no dragging it out or trying to milk the time, moving all slow so I could stay on the phone longer. She was honest, clear, and focused on what I really needed, no fluff. That alone made the session feel incredibly valuable. Psychic Source is the oldest and most trusted psychic service in the industry with over 35 years of experience. Setting up my account on their website was super easy, and they have this quick little quiz that helps you find a psychic based on what you're looking for. Whether it's love, past lives, energy readings, whatever. It made the whole process feel really personal and intentional. What sets them apart is the level of care and integrity. Only 2% of applicants actually become advisors, so you know you're speaking to someone who's truly gifted and held to high ethical standards. You can connect through phone, video chat, or even text, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And they back up everything with a no-risk guarantee. If you're not happy with your last paid reading, it's free. Another thing I love, they donate 1% of every purchase to a charity you choose at no extra cost to you. Now here's the best part. If you use my link, trypsychicsource.com/yaya, and my special code YAYA, you can get up to 40 minutes for just $19.80. That's a $240 value, and you don't have to use it all in one session. You can spread those minutes out across multiple advisors to see who you truly vibe with. And y'all, my reading was only 15 minutes, and that was jam-packed. So being able to split up 40 minutes across readings, across advisors, I like that. Again, just head to trypsychicsource.com/yaya or click the link in my description and use code YAYA to connect with someone right now. Like, I was able to do my reading in the moment because the person I felt connected to was actually online, and within 2-3 minutes I was on the phone with her getting a reading. Because if there's one thing this Andrew Cohen story teaches us, is this: never give your power away. Seek guidance from people who help you strengthen your intuition, not silence it. So let's start with the rise of the guru, the making of Andrew Cohen. Andrew Cohen, unlike a lot of other spiritual cult leaders, didn't start out as a tyrant. In fact, his journey began with a youthful spiritual longing. Born in 1955 to an upper middle class family in New York City, Cohen grew up in a secular Jewish household with little interest in religion, but at the age of 16, he experienced what he later described as a sudden cosmic consciousness, a spontaneous spiritual awakening that shook him to his core. That glimpse of transcendence lit a fire in him. By his early 20s, after a stint as a jazz musician, Cohen abandoned ordinary life to chase that mystical high. Funded by a family inheritance, he traveled and studied meditation, determined to recapture the profound freedom he had tasted as a teen. Now, in 1986, Cohen's quest led him to India, into the modest home of H.W.L. Punja. What happened next would define Cohen's life. According to Cohen's own account, enlightenment struck him like lightning in his very first meeting with Punja. In a flash, he realized that I had always been free. Instead of chasing it, he realized he was always free. Punja apparently affirmed this insight, at least initially. Cohen took it as a grand anointing, the guru's blessing to teach others. With a heart full of zeal and perhaps ego, 31-year-old Andrew Cohen declared himself awake and ready to guide the world. He wasn't shy about stepping into the guru role. The same year, 1986, Andrew Cohen began teaching small groups of Western seekers, sharing the gospel of sudden enlightenment he had embraced. He founded a group first called the Impersonal Enlightenment Fellowship, later the Moksha Foundation. In time, it would be rebranded as Enlighten Next. Bright-eyed students gathered around this young American who claimed to have found ultimate truth. Some left their former teachers to follow him. Cohen's charisma, always the charisma, was undeniable. He was articulate, intense, and passionately convinced that enlightenment was not a distant dream but a living reality, accessible here and now. Word spread. By the 1990s, Andrew Cohen was attracting attention in global spiritual circles. He launched a glossy magazine in 1991 boldly titled What is Enlightenment?, which features psychological essays, interviews, and commentary on spiritual evolution. This magazine, eventually renamed Enlighten Next magazine, established Cohen as a major voice in the New Age spirituality movement. He rubbed shoulders with prominent figures, most notably philosopher Ken Wilber, who praised Cohen's commitment to pushing students beyond their limits. With Wilbur's intellectual backing and the magazine's reach, Cohen's reputation as an innovative spiritual teacher and enlightenment master, teaching a brand new form of wisdom, grew dramatically. Cohen's own teachings evolved during this period into something called the evolutionary enlightenment. Traditional enlightenment, he argued, was not enough. It was too passive, too inward. Instead, Cohen preached an impersonal, ever-evolving enlightenment, a kind of spiritual progress that would propel humanity forward. This resonated with many educated seekers who wanted enlightenment, to engage with the modern world, not to retreat from it. By the early 2000s, Enlighten Next, the group and the magazine, had an international presence. Centers in multiple countries, students on several continents, and a sprawling 220-acre headquarters in rural Massachusetts. At the height of his fame, Andrew Cohen was not just a teacher, but a guru with a global following, seen by devotees as a pioneer of enlightened living. Yet, even as Cohen's star rose, shadows were already forming around him. He spoke often of transcending the ego completely, insisting on total surrender from those around him. As he would later learn, this wasn't just theory. Behind the scenes, Andrew Cohen was beginning to demand an almost fanatical devotion from his closest students. The same man who wrote eloquently about consciousness was planting the seeds of an authoritarian spiritual empire. But let's get more into Enlighten Next and the aspects of it that involved devotion, discipline, and control. In its early years, life in the Enlighten Next community felt charged with a sense of purpose. Dozens, eventually hundreds, of seekers came together to pursue the lofty goal Cohen laid out, nothing less than collective enlightenment. They meditated for hours a day, often starting before dawn. They shared communal homes, pooled resources, and in many cases renounced personal comforts. Many even took vows of celibacy, believing sexual energy should be redirected towards spiritual growth. Everything was about transcending the ego and living for a higher purpose. From the outside, one might see a disciplined spiritual community. Inside, however, a subtle but powerful shift was happening. The community's focus slowly moved from the idea of enlightenment to the person of Andrew Cohen himself. As years passed, Cohen's words became absolute. He was not just their teacher, but the ultimate authority on truth to be obeyed without question. Enlighten Next evolved into a Cohen's personal kingdom, with him as the unquestioned ruler at the center. Daily life grew increasingly intense. Cohen introduced a dizzying array of practices and rules, all under the banner of accelerating spiritual evolution. There were group meetings every week where students would investigate the teachings, which soon turned into something else entirely, sessions of targeted criticism and shaming. In these gatherings, one member would be singled out for allegedly showing ego or falling short of devotion. The others, under Cohen's guidance, would unleash on that person, attacking their character relentlessly in the guise of helping them overcome ego. So basically, he said, pick on them, and everybody picked on them. If the poor student protested or showed hurt, it only proved they hadn't surrendered enough. The message was clear: absolute humility or be cut down. Over time, this atmosphere bred fear and conformity. Disciples learned that any display of individuality could invite humiliation. Andrew Cohen reinforced this by introducing what he called acts of outrageous integrity. To outsiders, these were nothing short of bizarre punishment. Cohen's outrageous methods included things like forcing a student to shave her head as a cure for vanity and pride, not just once, but keeping it shaved for a year or more if he deemed her still too proud. He might even order an embarrassed follower to stand in front of the group and be rebuked for hours until their defiance was broken. Cohen's control extended into every facet of his followers' lives. He decided who could date whom within the community. In fact, whether you could have a romantic relationship at all. Many devotees spent years single, forbidden from seeking partners outside, and only allowed to date those within the group with Cohen's explicit blessing. And even those rare relationships could be snuffed out on Cohen's orders. So if he said, y'all need to break up, they needed to break up immediately. If he judged one partner to be too full of ego or the relationship a distraction from their service or their focus on him, he simply would decree it over. Heartbreak and loneliness were just another price of loyalty. Financial pressure was another tool of control. Life at the Massachusetts Center, a lovely estate known as Fox Hollow, came with hefty donations. At one point, Cohen imposed a $1,000 per year entrance fee for each year a student had been studying with him, essentially a literal tax on their devotion. Longtime students suddenly owed tens of thousands of dollars if they wanted to live at the guru's feet in Fox Hollow. Those who truly believed in Cohen's mission paid without question, even if it drained their savings. If Cohen demanded more money directly, whether for publishing projects, organizational needs, or his personal desires, it was expected that you will open up your wallet and give him exactly what he asked for. To the devoted, these sacrifices and rules were tests of faith. They convinced themselves that this crucible of intense practice and personal surrender would forge them into egoless, enlightened blessings. Cohen's charisma and the group's shared idealism kept them going. Students spoke of profound experiences in meditation, of feeling a part of something cosmic and important. That intoxicating mix of spiritual highs and communal purpose made it easy to overlook the growing red flags. But step by step, line after line was crossed. What had started as an idealistic venture was warping into something sinister. Cohen's behavior grew more extreme and unpredictable. He demanded absolute loyalty, and he began to punish anyone who disappointed him in cruel, degrading ways. In the world of enlightened next, these acts were rationalized, even launched as crazy wisdom of tough love. Some outside voices like Ken Wilber even applauded Cohen's fierceness, spinning it as the necessary fierceness of a guru determined to smash the ego. He had a thing against egos, even though he had the biggest one. Andrew's followers came to the conclusion that the fire of purification was painful but necessary and holy. If you felt torn apart and tormented, it meant the process was working. There was loss of autonomy within the community's echo chamber. Andrew Cohen's transgressions only escalated. Students have shared that they were slapped in the face hard with no warning. Sometimes Cohen himself did the slapping. Other times he would command one student to strike another, turning disciples into instruments of each other's humiliation and abuse. So imagine the confusion that they're going through. The person you consider a spiritual sibling suddenly hitting you at the guru's command, or your own hand involuntarily hurting a friend because you couldn't refuse the master's order. In one widely recounted incident, Cohen had buckets of paint poured over a former student's head in front of a crowd, intending to punish and publicly shame the person for leaving the community. And he considered this act an act of integrity, as if defiling someone was a way to awaken them. So remember the woman that was freezing in the lake that I told y'all about earlier? She was not alone. Cohen especially targeted female disciples with a peculiar contempt, often blaming what he called women's conditioning for their supposed spiritual failures. More than once, he instructed groups of women to march into a nearby lake in the dead of winter, submerging themselves as deeply as they could right before they're about to drown to atone for their faults. Some stayed in the freezing cold water until their bodies nearly shut down, until hypothermia set in, even to the point of losing consciousness. This was not a mystical metaphor, it was real physical. Like, literally, he had people in freezing cold water. Women literally risked their lives into those icy waters, all to prove their devotion to Andrew and to purge themselves of some imagined sin of ego. Cohen's leverage over his students was intense. He held their spiritual hopes in his hands. Many had renounced everything, careers, family ties, personal ambitions, to follow him. They gave up their life. They dropped out of school because he was the leader and they wanted to follow him. They wrote confessions and apologies when he berated them and thanked him sincerely after he did so. So he would abuse them. They would go through it, then write him a thank you letter for the abuse because they felt like he was caring for them. Emotional breakdowns were common. Grown adults were reduced to frightened children, tiptoeing around the ever watchful eye of their guru. Many lost the ability to make the simplest decisions without Cohen's approval. Having been trained to believe he knew what was best in all things, personal autonomy wasn't just lost, it was surrendered at the door. The community became an echo chamber of Andrew Cohen's will. Having an individual thought was dangerous. The glossy magazines still circulated inspiring interviews and visionary ideas until it quietly ceased publication in 2011. Visitors to the center might see smiling, enthusiastic students, all well-run retreats, and think everything was wonderful, like, wow, he really curated a safe space for spiritual beings to be spiritual. But the dirty secrets were kept behind a veneer of integrity and absolute devotion. To outsiders, Cohen was still a respected spiritual teacher. If anything, rumors of his strictness only enhanced his mystique as a no-nonsense guru. But inside the community, cracks were forming. Not everyone could reconcile the cruelty with the rhetoric of love and transcendence. Over the years, a number of close students reached their breaking points and left. Some left quietly, being able to sneak away in the night to avoid confrontation. Others departed in anguish and anger, disillusioned by the hypocrisy and abuse. They would do it very shyly at first, but they grew confidence as they found each other and compared experiences. Like, I'm tired of going through this, and that. The next person would be like, yeah, I'm tired of going through this, and that too. So since they had somebody that felt the same way, they began to speak even more. And by the mid-2000s, books and blogs emerged, exposing the ugly truth about Andrew Cohen's teachings and his community and the treatment he had towards his followers. Cohen's own mother, his mama, Luna Tarlow, who had once been his devotee, wrote a memoir called Mother of God, describing how her son turned into a tyrant and how she eventually fled his influence. So his own mama had to run away. A former right-hand man of Andrew published Enlightenment Blues, detailing the spiritual heartbreak of life under Cohen's spell. And a bunch of ex-followers compiled their stories into a book called An American Guru, A Story of Love, Betrayal, and Healing, painting a damning picture of manipulation and trauma at Enlighten Next. So these revelations were devastating, yet for a long time they barely dented Cohen's enterprise. Like, anybody barely paid attention to it, and they're just like, yeah, you're gonna have people that talk negatively about you. True believers brushed off the critics as bitter or stuck in ego. Inside Fox Hollow, Cohen dismissed the negative accounts as lies or as proof that those who left couldn't handle the heat. Groupthink held the remaining devotees together, and groupthink is basically an attitude of us versus them. It's a well-documented phenomenon in cults. The more outsiders criticize, the more tightly the insiders cling to their faith, needing to justify the sacrifices they made. So they needed to not feel crazy, so they'll start to over-believe their beliefs to convince them more that they're not doing anything wrong, and it's the people on the outside that's crazy. So for years, Cohen's core community carried on even as the outside world increasingly saw enlightenment as a cult, which it was. So by 2013, lucky number 13, by now Andrew has been a guru for 27 years. A whole generation of disciples had come and gone, but now the empire he built was about to unravel at a shocking speed. The unraveling began from within. Among those who had stood by Cohen the longest, some of his senior most followers, people who had dedicated decades to enlighten next, finally reached a breaking point. Finally, they could no longer ignore the lofty talk of evolution and enlightenment versus the reality of intimidation and harm. These leaders started to question Cohen directly, urging him to examine his behavior. In essence, the inner circle staged an uprising. For a while, Andrew tried to calm down the rebellion quietly. He sent the questioning senior students away on special retreats, telling them to overcome their rebelliousness. At one point, a group of them was ordered to convene in London to work through their doubts, and which was an attempt by Cohen to isolate and squash the battle that was going on. So basically, send away the rebellious kids so everybody can abide. But being away from Fox Hollow, something powerful happened. The senior students began to confide in each other, and when they did that, the facade cracked. They realized they shared some of the same concerns about Cohen's authoritarian rule and the harm it was causing. So instead of purging their so-called negativity, they came back more convinced that their guru was in the wrong. In a final confrontation, these longtime devotees met with Cohen, reportedly in Europe, away from the main campus, and drew a line in the sand. They presented him with the truth he had evaded for years. His actions were abusive and unacceptable, and they would no longer stand by him. Such defiance from his most loyal followers was unprecedented. Cohen, faced with the mutiny of those he trusted, was stunned. He resisted, denied, likely raged, but the tide had turned. One by one, these senior leaders made the agonizing decision to leave Enlighten next. And when they left, hundreds of other students followed almost overnight. So like imagine the scene at Fox Hollow in the spring of 2013, a community that had thrived for nearly 3 decades simply vanishing in a matter of weeks. Meditation halls fell silent. Residents emptied out. The organization's infrastructure in boards, centers, and projects across the world dissolved as local leaders cut ties. Andrew Cohen did not try to immediately rebuild or retaliate. Perhaps he was too shocked. In June 2013, he announced that he was stepping down from his role as a leader of Enlighten Next. He declared he would take an extended sabbatical. I'm like, they love to step down when they get in trouble, child. And he said he's doing this to reflect on what had happened. In a note to the remaining community, Cohen made a startling admission for a man who had always claimed to be egoless. He stated, "In spite of the depth of my awakening, my ego is still alive and well." It was a moment of rare humility. He even offered apologies, at least in words, to those he had hurt, saying he was sorry for the pain his ignorance and lack of awareness had caused. And it's like, yeah, 27 years later. Enlighten Next as an organization swiftly crumbled after his departure. The Grand Estate in Massachusetts was sold off. The magazine was already not doing good, so that was easy to get rid of. And the international centers shuttered or rebranded under new leadership, independent of Cohen. The man who once declared himself as a guru was now a cautionary tale whispered about in spiritual circles. For the hundreds of former members, it was a time of grief, confusion, and liberation all at once. Many had to rebuild their lives from scratch because they gave up everything, some with no money and decades of trauma to heal from and process, but at least free from the shadows and the weight of Andrew. In the following years, Cohen lived quietly out of the spotlight, presumably grappling with the consequences of his actions. Eventually, he did attempt a mild comeback, offering teachings again on a much smaller scale, but the mystique was gone. The trust was already broken. The community he had created was no more. Andrew Cohen had fallen from grace, joining the ranks of numerous spiritual leaders, occult leaders, before him who had flew too close to the sun of power and crashed back to earth. Andrew Cohen and Enlighten Next is not just about one man's ego trip. It's a striking example of cult dynamics in action. Right in the modern spiritual marketplace, we often imagine cults as something that happens to other people. Cohen's community illustrates how authoritarian leadership can corrupt even the most high minded spiritual endeavors. All it takes is a leader who believes he's infallible and followers willing to believe it too. The dynamic builds gradually. First comes the charisma and the promise, a guru who seems to have answers to life's deepest questions. Then a community forms, bonded by a shared dream. Early successes and genuine spiritual highs create trust. Members bond deeply, they feel special, they feel chosen. The leader's quirks or demands can be overlooked in the light of the greater mission. Next comes the tightening of control. The leader's demands increase, but each step is rationalized. It's for your growth, it's for the mission, for the love of God, for God. Personal boundaries erode. Maybe you give a bit more money, accept a harsher critique, relinquish a personal desire. Each compromise seems small at first, but these small surrenders of autonomy accumulate. For anyone on a spiritual path, Andrew Cohen's rise and fall underscores a crucial message. No true teacher should demand your self-alienation or your blind obedience. There is a difference between challenging a student's ego for their growth and systematically breaking a person's will. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you are asked to endure humiliation, pain, or exploitation as a prerequisite for enlightenment, step back and ask hard questions. Enlightenment, however one defines it, should lead to greater freedom, compassion, and wholeness, not fear, dependency, and trauma. In the end, Andrew Cohen's community was aiming for something beautiful, the evolution of consciousness, the betterment of humanity, but it became a cautionary tale of one man's unchecked power and unexamined ego turned that dream into a nightmare. The story carries a dark, serious warning. Beware of gurus who claim to have all the answers, all the knowledge, especially if those answers require you to abandon your own judgment and humanity. Andrew Cohen's story ended recently on March 25th, 2025 in India, the same sacred ground where his awakening once began. A heart attack took him quietly, but the ripple of what he built and what he broke still lingers. In the end, his life reminds us not every voice that speaks of life is free from a shadow. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Let me know if you ever found yourself in a cult-like situation. How did you become aware of it? How did you get out of it? Let's have a conversation below. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. And like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Until next time, you guys, Ashe.